Hey, Mystic Michaela spiritual family. Welcome to Know Your Aura with Mystic Michaela. We are talking today about your aura and the time period in which you live. How do different time periods that people lived in affect their auras in the past and today? And how does it affect you today? First, we're going to talk about this with Scott, a little story and history. And then we're going to go into what I see when I look at those old photos and what generalizations I can pick up and what happens when I get to do readings of people from older time periods. But first, hey, Scotty.
Hey, guys.
So we came up with this kind of just on the fly.
Yes, we were on a road trip.
Yes.
We were going from South Dakota, Spearfish, South Dakota, to Teddy Roosevelt National Park in North Dakota.
Right.
Let me just explain this to you. You get out of Spearfish, there's one more town, the town of Beulah. And then after that town, there is absolutely nothing from there to this national park.
Like, how many hours were we driving? It was just like flat prairie.
The drive was probably around, that part was of the journey we drove so much on this trip was about 4 hours.
Oh, okay.
But it's 4 hours of absolute nothing.
Right.
So the park is named after Teddy Roosevelt, who was the 26th president of the United States.
Yeah.
So I just asked you, hey, why don't you just quickly look up some information? Like, how did it happen that Teddy Roosevelt, because I always knew him from that he lived in New York, spent most of his life in New York or Washington.
Right.
How did he get to that area? Or why is that park named after him? Did he just put his name on it? Did he live there? What was going on? And you started to do some research in the car, and that's how this kind of came about.
Right. I was, we got the kids in the back seat. We had a lot of time. And I'm like, okay, Theodore Roosevelt, is that that's the guy from Night at the Museum?
Right.
That Robin Williams plays.
Right.
Okay, cool. But then obviously I'm like, all right, let's find out how this came to be, like you said. And then I get their pictures. I get his picture. I get his daughter's picture. I'm like, whoa. And I start seeing their auras. I'm like, whoa. Because sometimes people stand out to me a bit because their auras are flying off the page in a time period when I'm not used, and which I'll talk about later, I'm not used to seeing that much vibrancy. And the story was amazing. And you're gonna tell us, and we're all gonna kind of associate what energies or colors we see with these.
Okay, you're right. So we're gonna do two people. First, we're gonna do Theodore Roosevelt, and then we're gonna do his oldest child. He had 6 children. His oldest child, Alice. After. Okay. So let's take Teddy first. All right. So we're on our way again to North Dakota. I'm thinking, how did he get here? Why did he go here? Well, his wife and his mom died on the same day.
The same day.
1884 was a year, 2 days after Valentine's Day.
Oh my God.
His mom and wife died exact same day.
And it wasn't a similar instance.
Right. It wasn't like a car accident.
Right. Well, no such thing.
Couldn't be a car accident.
A horse accident.
It wasn't a horse accident.
Right.
Right. 2 separate things.
Right.
And his wife had given birth 2 days later. So it was complication. His wife was complications from childbirth.
So he had a 2-day-old newborn.
He had a 2-day-old newborn named Alice.
Mm-hmm.
And actually he refused to name, and that was the wife's name too. So he actually refused to ever call her by her name Alice.
Aww.
He called her had like a nickname for her, which he didn't like, but that's something else. And he just decides, screw this. I am going to the Dakotas.
Right.
And at that time, it wasn't North and South Dakota. It'd been like Dakota Territory.
Mm-hmm.
So he goes, leaves the newborn, the 2-day-old, with the aunt, the sister.
Right.
And now you can look into that for time periods in itself. Like,
yeah.
What's going on here? Dad's leaving. Mom just died, and now Dad's leaving.
That was typical of the time.
Right.
I would assume.
Yeah, that was more typical of that time period. Today, I don't think that flies. But so he went to the Dakotas, went to the Badlands, South Dakota, then North Dakota. And there he does a lot of crazy stuff.
Okay.
He becomes the sheriff, like self-appointed sheriff of a town.
Oh, can you imagine just walking into a place and being like, hi, I'm the sheriff now.
Yeah. Here I am. I'm Teddy.
Yeah.
It's funny because he was actually born really weak and very sickly.
Okay.
So it's funny that he came, because when we think of Teddy Roosevelt, I know you think of him from the Night at the Museum. But we think of him as like this big, beefy, strong guy, right? He does his hand at ranching, gets into bar fights, just kind of running the show out there.
Okay.
he does that for a few years, and then he returns to New York, where, that's where I knew that's where I always thought he was. I didn't even know he lived out in the Dakotas until we went on this trip. And he becomes the mayor of New York City. And then he becomes a volunteer in the Spanish-American War.
Oh, wow.
And he's got his own volunteer unit, and he basically saves the day.
Really?
Like, this is like something out of a movie. Yeah.
Yeah.
His band was called the Rough Riders. They nicknamed themselves the Rough
I've
Riders.
heard that
right?
For somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you took high school history 101 or something,
right?
College, whatever, you're going to hear about him. And he goes up San Juan Hill, and he leads the charge. And they win the war,
wow.
And he comes back and he's a hero, just famous war hero.
Okay.
And then after that, he becomes actually the president. He's only 42 when he becomes president.
Oh.
So youngest president at that time. I think the only one I think might have been younger was JFK, but I'm not sure. He might actually be the youngest president.
Okay.
And he actually became president when William McKinley was assassinated.
Okay.
So in 1901, McKinley gets assassinated, and then Roosevelt takes over. And the thing with his presidency, he was for the little guy.
Right.
His whole thing is for the little guy.
Okay.
He's going to take on big business. He's going to take on the corporations. He's going to take on the monopolies. And he also does it in conservation.
Okay.
So he wasn't, and let's just put everything out there. He was an avid hunter.
Yeah.
He changes his tune.
Okay.
And he goes into conservation, saves 200 million acres for natural forest, wildlife refuges, things of that nature.
Yeah.
Now, I also want to add to this. Many of those lands that basically were to save the animals,
right.
We'll call them the little guy also,
right.
were Native American lands.
Oh, he just took them.
So he took, right. So right. I don't want to say this guy is a perfect saint here.
Of course.
He's taking Native American lands and then turning them into United States national forest. So just keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, you're just saying everything.
Yeah, I'm just kind of giving you the whole picture of him. And then he wins election for the first time in 1904, so he does win an election. And of course, his big famous line is "Speak softly and carry a big stick."
Oh, I've heard that.
Yeah, you've heard that probably. And that basically means like, hey, if we need to use force, when you need to use it, you use it.
Right.
And basically, he brings the United States on the world stage.
Okay.
He is making us a powerhouse.
Right.
And then after that, he says he does sign a pledge that he won't run again because he did serve from 1901 to 1908. But at that time, you can run as many times as you wanted. Yeah, there was no amendment that said you couldn't. That was only precedent set by George Washington.
Oh, there's no amendment. Oh.
Right. Now there's an amendment. You can only run 2 times.
Right.
Back then, you couldn't. And then so he leaves. He goes on safari. He does all these things. And he, in his fashion, he believes the country just went to pot when he wasn't there because he wasn't leading it.
Oh, my God.
So he comes back in 1912 to run again. His own party, by the way, under his own party called the Bull Moose Party.
Oh, my God.
Because he always thought of himself as a bull moose.
This guy.
And he did not win, though.
Okay.
He did not win the election there.
I wonder how he took it.
Yeah, he got shot during the campaign.
Really?
Yeah, he got shot. It's kind of a crazy story. And then he dies in 1919 at 60.
Okay.
All right. So before we get into his daughter.
That's a very, very full life. That's a very full 60 years.
And we want you guys at home, what aura combination based on the material that I just gave you, do you think Teddy Roosevelt was? I, of course, have my guess.
Right.
I'm pretty sure of this, but I'll let you take over from here.
So this is what when I was researching for the park. And of course, I've seen pictures of Teddy Roosevelt before just because I've been a kid in social studies class or whatever. But I was looking at him like, whoa, I'm like, this guy's super red, obviously. But he's really red. And the red is like vibrant and fiery and really strong and abrasive. And it's like, it really jumps off the page, even in these black and white photos, which can be harder sometimes to read auras, but not in his case. So I cannot imagine him in person. Like in person, I'd love to deep dive like other people's impressions of him, because in person, like this guy must, if he can jump off the page at me 100 something years later and in a black and white photo, I wonder what he was like when you saw him. But his energy is very powerful, but he's blue too. Interesting, because I think a blue, and you think about all the things that we talk about blue here, like empaths, feel other people's feelings as their own, that kind of thing. And he's a hunter, and he's like doing big speeches and very loud and throwing himself in very crazy circumstances. That is one of the things we're talking about today, how auras can be different in different time periods. I don't know if there was room for empath back then. And most people, there just wasn't room for empath. And I don't know myself, this would be awesome to talk to like a historical psychologist, if that exists, about or something. I wonder if this has to do with how children are raised, if this has to do with just what empathy was, what the definition of it was back then or whatever. But it's there. It's just different than I think we talk about it here. But anyways, very, very red and blue. Very red.
All right.
And that big man on campus vibe that we talk about with the reds is like extra.
Right.
Hello, podcast fans. If you're looking for a new podcast, if you enjoy articles, books, pop culture, and hilarity, try listening to the Brain Candy Podcast.
That's right. The Brain Candy Podcast has over 500 episodes of educational hilarity to satiate your learning needs. Just search for the Brain Candy Podcast on your podcast app or click the link in the show notes.
So, in essence, what you're saying is, if someone's questioning at home, and I think most of us probably got red, most of us said red, blue.
Yeah.
I'm assuming, if you listen to
this
say
red, purple.
show for a while, or maybe someone said red, purple, right?
Yeah, you can see somebody saying that.
So, the audience might be asking, well, why the blue?
Mm-hmm.
And you might be saying, well, how could someone, and I think you covered it a little bit there, and you might cover it a little bit more, but the big question is, how could someone who removed Native Americans from their lands or killed hunted animals be a blue?
I know.
I'm a red blue myself, and I get upset on any animal when it dies. I couldn't hunt any animal.
I know.
So
unless you really had to,
right?
I couldn't,
right? Unless I really
do it
had to,
just for fun, to
Like we're down here in Florida, everyone wants to kill the iguanas.
Oh my god!
And we have iguanas in our backyard. I've seen them in our pool even.
I know.
And I'm always fighting to keep them alive.
I know.
Everyone's like, they're an invasive species, and I'm like, well, what do you think all us
think
Floridians are?
Yeah, like I'm an invasive
yeah.
species.
So.
I sure am.
So how could I be a red blue and Teddy Roosevelt be a red blue? Maybe is what we're going to try to answer today.
Yeah, it's just I don't know if I have an answer. I just have that. I think that there's for the different time periods, there's different definitions of blue, or empath colors, or the auras themselves can shift and change a little bit.
Right.
But yeah.
Okay. All right. Now let's take his oldest child, Alice Roosevelt. Okay, so she was born, we already said this, she was born in 1884, and then, like I said, 2 days later, her mom dies, and her grandmother dies as well on the same day. And Teddy goes off to the Dakotas to do his thing. All right, so he comes back, and then he gets remarried.
Okay.
And then he has 5 kids with his new wife.
Oh.
Who I think it was like his childhood sweetheart or high school sweetheart or something like that. So there's Alice, and then there's these 5 other kids.
Looking at Alice, I think that...
And the stepmom.
I can guess how that went.
Yeah.
For Alice and stepmom there.
Now, she was, for that time period, and born in 1884, so we're looking at the early 1900s, so let's just put the year at like 1905 or something like that. She's like, I don't know how you put her today, like the Paris Hilton of today.
Like a socialite?
Socialite, yeah. Mm-hmm. And she was known as a very eccentric, strong-willed woman, danced on rooftops. She wore snakes as accessories.
Oh, gosh.
She did some, she was an independent, free spirit, kind of went, head-to-head with Teddy.
Oh,
because he saw her as ruining his image,
right?
And not being proper because she ran around with all the boys, and she'd be seen in at that time. Now they did have cars, so she would be in cars racing around with boys.
Yeah,
I don't know how fast the cars went at that time period, but nonetheless. And she'd be in the media for that time period. The stories we've written about her. She wore pants.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, they were all over for wearing pants.
The horror.
She chewed gum. And they'd be all over for that.
She chewed gum.
Yes, she smoked. All over for that. Okay. She played poker.
Oh, my God.
So she did all these things that a proper lady for the time period was not supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
That's funny.
Want to try to guess her colors at home right now.
It's not hard.
Shout out your guess.
Yeah.
And what's her color?
She's super purple.
Yeah.
You know, she's most, so I'm just looking at these pictures of her that I grabbed off the internet, and just like Dad, super vibrant, but just purple with a little blue in there. Which I guess because I'm a woman, so thinking about how hard it already is to be now a woman, and honestly, who knows? You could make an argument if it's harder now or then at this point with the way things are going. But like looking at her, oh my gosh, like it's very unusual for me to see this hue of purple at that time and in older pictures. And I'm going to talk about this more coming up when I talk about, what I see in historical photos and whatnot on my own. But usually the way the purple goes is I'll see it, but it gets snuffed out in a kid or something like that. Like hers is going strong. And it's almost like the way I get her energy, it's like raging against, like I'm going to rage against the machine or the man, or I'm going to keep it going just to spite. And I feel like she grabbed her power from the negative attention. Like, oh, if I'm getting negative attention, it means I'm doing something right. So I'm just going to keep feeding that. Now, obviously, she had privilege to allow herself to do this. I'm sure that's why I don't see it with a lot of women in that time period back then, because they didn't have the privilege of protection so that they could keep doing that and still have a roof over their heads and someone to protect them and whatnot. But she was able to do that. But I could imagine a lot of women shaming it, but a lot of women also being like, wow, that's really cool.
Right.
Yes. And even in the quiet of themselves, like, yes, do it for all of us, please, like that. So
and that's actually correct. Historically. So like, I guess you call that purple shaming now too.
Yeah, purple shaming.
So yeah, her father and her family were trying to rein her in, which Teddy Roosevelt said he couldn't do. In fact, it was like an impossible task to keep her in there. But the people were clamoring for her and loved that she was doing all these things.
Okay.
Remember the flappers in the 20s are coming up. They're not there yet.
Right.
She's like a precursor to that too.
Okay.
The
like cutting their hair, wearing short dresses, that kind of thing.
So she's kind of like avant-garde. She's on the front end of that.
Yeah.
Which is real cool.
Yeah.
A real cool figure. I didn't know anything about her until actually I did this research, and just fascinating.
I mean, she's got such a sad backstory, too. Yeah. When I was reading about Teddy and why he went to the Dakota Territory, he was bereft. Like, he was so sad. And he said, like, going out there saved him. And he wouldn't be president without going out there. I read that, like, when I was looking at all this stuff. And just with her, and I feel like they really, both of them, their energy shows me that life, they really lived it. They really thrived on life and living and the fearlessness that you can possess with that. And I find that in a historical figure just very exhilarating. So I think that's interesting.
No, that's really interesting. And it's also interesting that she got into the politics a little bit, but she was more like for her dad. Like, if someone like William Taft was saying bad things about her dad or wasn't running the country, she'd be like on him.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like almost kind of like a red in there.
Yeah.
Like the red, like that purple being,
yeah,
feisty.
Purples are feisty. Yeah. Purples and reds get along in the way that you described, like going button heads a bit. But yes and no. I bet he was saying stop it, but at the same time, like, oh, geez, whatever. Just don't get caught, that. And so I'm sure, because I just knowing Reds and then looking at Teddy's picture and how red he is, he was probably like a lot of bark and not a ton of bite to his own kid.
Right.
So obviously she wasn't scared of him, is what I'm trying to say.
Right.
Like at all. So.
Well, it's like, it's almost like the more he would push, then she'd push even more.
Right.
And it just... And like, listen, if we just look at it from a family standpoint here, she's that one child. There's the 5 other. There's, the stepmom was, probably pushing her out. That's what I was reading about. Like, she was pushing her away, causing the rift.
Okay.
And then, of course, Teddy probably, what does he do? He's caught between the 1 and the 5.
Yeah, the wife and the daughter.
So it's,
sounds like a lot of dysfunction that a lot of people can relate to. Well, we have something fun for you to do. Go to knowyouraura.com. We have a brand new quiz. Which historical figure do you vibe with? And please share your results on Facebook or on, I think it's called X now, but old Twitter. Share with us and share in your stories. We want to see who you vibe with and what their aura color is.
Right. A quick break. We got BetterHelp. We need it.
Know Your Aura with Mystic Michaela is sponsored by BetterHelp. Social media is really great in many ways, but it can be very negative, especially for all of us. And I think we know that. The saying goes, comparison is the thief of joy. It's so easy to get caught up in comparing yourself to other people and how they put their highlights on social media and then comparing them to your own lowlights. Therapy can help you focus on what you want instead of what other people have, so you can start living your best life. I've benefited from therapy throughout my life. Lessons I've learned in therapy sessions have served me for years afterwards. It's not just for people who've experienced major trauma. It can be just to have someone to talk to so you don't feel so alone. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, totally suited to your schedule. You start out by filling out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist. And then you switch therapists anytime for no additional charge if you want to. Stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/KYA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/KYA. The way my gift works is that if there is a photo, I can see an aura, which means that if you find a historical, actual photograph of somebody, I can see an aura around them, but I'm limited to when photography was invented. And that makes things very interesting because when I see auras from times long gone, they're a little different than they are today. When I talk about auras here on the podcast, I talk about all the colors: indigo, blue, turquoise, purple, red, yellow, green. I am talking about how they work today in our contemporary times, in our present times. But they worked differently in times past. And this is what I think about that. So time periods are contexts. Contexts in the 3D, just like we live in the 3D now, they lived in the 3D then. So we have that in common. When I talk about the 3D, I mean the way society is built to keep a lot of us down, and the way that society is built to focus more on envy, jealousy, greed, fear, all of that need to survive is a lot of how we exist here. And the struggle and the tough things that are created within this 3D world are things that are constraints against our energy. So you are a beautiful ball of abundant, connected light shoved into a biological human body. And you are living amongst other biological human bodies, and we're all just trying to get by on this 3D planet. And I have talked about this a million times over. I do feel it's a classroom. I feel like you come here and it's that battle between the soul and the ego and what you learn in the midst of it all. But your energy can only do so much. It's truly like that Bob Seger song, Against the Wind. I mean, you show up here and you come in and some people come in as kids and immediately they are shut down. Okay. But some people have more time to shine their light and therefore get more comfortable with it. So when I see people, their energy signatures and colors, what I'm seeing is how well they're expressing themselves. That's really what your aura is. It's how well you're expressing who you actually are out in the world. But to do that effectively, you have to find situations and people and environments and contexts that match what you already know to be true about you. And here's the deal. In the 3D world, that is very difficult due to all the 3D problems, racism, socioeconomic situations, the list goes on, the violence, the hatred, the anger, the wars, the conflict. I mean, all that. A lot of people end up just, it's a very tough life, and your energy isn't able to be expressed. So in different time periods, you get a taste of that. So instead of talking about a time period and how they work, think about a person and how they age. And then that's gonna metaphor back to something. So if you're lucky enough to grow old, what you'll notice is you cut parts of yourself out. You cut big chunks of who you are away, and you let them fall to pieces somewhere. They're still there. They're just forgotten for a while. And if you're lucky enough to get old, what happens is you start piecing them back together, and you start exploring them, and you start expressing them. Because there's more room for you to be who you are. That's what happens if you're lucky. In consecutive time periods, what happens, I feel, is as time moves, so does our world, and so does the 5D affecting the 3D, meaning as time moves on, there's more room for different energies to be more supported than they were in the past. And because we're not always supported by society to live to the full extent of our authentic energy, it's something that I notice that as time moves, you do too. So what I'm just trying to say is the context as it changes, people do. So time, just like a person, evolves, and then there's more room for different energies to have a say. So right now, I feel like it's really been a time for the empath auras to speak out. This currently, I feel like the first time since I was a kid to now, I would say people are talking about their feelings more freely. They're advocating for others. They're talking openly about self-help and mental health and self-care. It's not like it's getting better, but at least we talk about it. And it's something that you can find other people to talk about that with. I would say 150 years ago, that was not the case. So when I see different times in history, there's different times where different energies are supported or constrained or brought to light or pushed down. When we look at people from the past, when I see auras from the past, and just like we talked about, for example, with Theodore Roosevelt, he has a blue aura, but he's taking away lands from Native Americans. He's hunting animals down, things that we wouldn't necessarily connote with what I talk about with blues. Like, how's he an empath if he's doing that? And this isn't an excuse whatsoever. I'm just saying, I feel like the world has expanded to create more room for language to say, that's not how we do things here. Like, it's not just your rights, it's everyone's rights. It's not just your voice, it's everyone. So at least there's room now where people can call it out. Doesn't mean it's not still happening, by the way. It just means that we have language to express it, where possibly back then there wasn't. And I feel like blue or empath energies have evolved, is what I'm trying to say. And I'll tell you what, we're still not there yet. We're not. There is no way that we are at the full extent in any place where our energies are allowed to be exactly how they are supposed to be. Because when and you do too, like when you look at like a young child or, an innocent or a little animal or a very elderly person or just a pure moment, there's a feeling there. There's a feeling of an abundance of something bigger than us that can't come through all the way. You get glimpses, you don't get the whole thing. So until we get the whole thing, we're never going to be at our capacity. And every single time period that people exist in is going to have limiting effects on everyone's aura. And I don't know if that's negative or it's just what it is, because the collective consciousness is something that's extremely hard to fight against with your energy. I love reading older people. I read people of all ages, and I love reading older people. I love reading you, and then you give me pictures of your grandparents or your great-grandparents. I love when I read older people, I get to, see their grandparents or their parents in pictures. And it's like, wow, I really get to explore the energies of time periods that are long gone. It's kind of like an auric time capsule because you get a glimpse into the collective consciousness of that time, what the messaging was, how people thought about things, what people just didn't even realize, and it's, if you've lived long enough, you'll know what I mean by like, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize that. Kind of like when I was growing up in high school, I didn't even realize that it was horrific that they were talking about women's bodies that way all the time. Because I grew up at the time they were calling Jessica Simpson fat. And that was horrific because I look like that, And so if that's negative, you know what I mean? So it didn't even dawn on me till I think I was in my 30s and I have kids of my own. I'm like, wow, that was horrific, So I get to go into the time capsule of the collective consciousness when I get to look at historical pictures or antique photos or your loved ones in their old photos. It's such a gift to be able to get that insight and perspective because I think it helps understanding where they came from, to understand what is them and what isn't them, I think is a really cool thing as well. Seeing pictures of my grandma when she was young and just really hopeful and ready to take on the world, when she was so young, and then seeing her grow and seeing pictures from that time period where she had to really fight to do what she wanted to do as a woman and whatnot. My grandma was married at 18 and my mom's mom, and she had 2 kids right away, which was probably typical for the time, married to my grandpa, a man much older than her, 20 years older than her. All right. So it's like a whole thing. They married forever. And she was yellow, blue, and she was a great student, but then she got married and then she's a housewife. And she went back to school in her 40s and she got her doctorate in education and she taught first grade. She would always say things to me because she was like really yellow and very big into like the advocacy. She was like, you don't have to do what they tell you. You don't have to get married. You don't have to have kids. And education is the number one thing. They can't take that away from you. So I feel like with her, she was trying to, and she was real big on speaking up for yourself and, asking questions. Like if the doctor says something and you don't like that, ask a question. If they don't like you asking questions, get a new doctor. Like she was real big on a lot of things that she herself had to cut away. And then I saw her piece it back together and then try to impart that knowledge on us. And I feel like that is what time periods are. They're opportunities for us collectively to do that. And you're not going to reach perfection, but you can do a little better. And one of my hopes is, what I think about before I fall asleep at night is I just want to be part of a hopeful collective that I feel like we have listening to this podcast where it's not a drop in a bucket. It is something that we're doing to make it better for the people that come after us. Like it is the mending of some rips and tears that can make it a sturdier foundation for other people to do more upon. That is my hope. And I wonder if that's your hope too. But let's talk about how different aura colors kind of show up in the old photos. Now remember, this is the aura research of me, myself, and I, and also, I don't know, pictures weren't such a big thing back then as they are now. So it's, less pictures, but in general, you don't see a lot of variety of colors like you do now, which I would say is a good sign Now, so for example, let's say I look at a picture of class of 1903 and it's all the little third graders standing in front of a school or something. I'm zooming in. I feel like we all do that. A lot of us do. I zoom in, I'm looking, like, what's their aura? What's their aura? What's their aura? What's going on there? So yeah, I feel like, and I've said this before, does a historical psychologist exist? Because I'd love to know, I know it has something to do with how they raised kids and the programming and whatnot, because kids, I feel like, grew up a bit quicker in some ways in terms of being tough, because I'll see a lot of sassiness to their auras, more than you'd think, like, tough, and they could give it if they had to, and they could take it. And so not a lot of sensitivity. I'm sure there was no room for it in that world back then. There just wasn't as room for the hugs and it's okay, and let's talk about feelings. Like, there is room for it now. But I see purple in kids, not a lot of purple in adults in a lot of old photos. Purple, I associate that in old photos with a lot of activism. I think you had to be feisty to hang on to a cause, especially for women. Really feisty women were purple. Mostly, I would say I see a really kind of just oppressive blue, just a general blue color on a lot of people. I think the vibe was just fit in. You're not that special, try to get by, do best, don't hope for much. It depends, obviously, what section of the population you're looking at and time period and place and what's going on, for sure. But the blue is a lot. I just think the programming for a lot of history, and probably today too, is just, shut up and put up. Okay, a lot of yellow. The yellow's a little different, though, in older pictures. I think the orderliness is kind of like godliness. So doing things a certain way, like, okay, we bake on Mondays, laundry on Tuesdays, whatever it is. Like, the orderliness is how you actually do good in life. Focus on that. Everything else will fall into place. So it feels more of a rigidity with the yellow a little bit. Pink, believe it or not, I'll see it, but I usually just see it with like privilege or children, yeah, a lot of pink in kids back then if they had a life that was decent. But yeah, I'm obviously not talking about like looking at factory worker children or children who are enslaved or something like that. I'm talking about a nice family photo from 1902, like you might see a pink kid or something like that. And a lot of women who probably had a lot of money, and they were, quote, kept women or something like that. I'll see pink in older photos. Red, I feel like red really did prevail for a while. I think now it's green because the tech industry and pharmaceuticals and things like that maybe are taken over. But the reds did have their heyday for quite a while. So you'll see a lot of red guys and people wearing red that aren't red to try to fit in. Not that people still don't do that, and it's not that, but I feel like the heyday now might be more green. You see a lot of greens back then too. They seem a little bit more either upper crust society, or I'll see them kind of more in detailed trades or something of religion or something in that world, more systematic. But that's the other thing. I think about this a lot. I wonder if you do too. Now there's all this software and AI and all these green people are super into it. What were they doing? Because people are just people. Like, we're like 500 years ago, what were those people doing? They were probably like skilled tradespeople and really good at their craft or engineering or doing technology in some other way. But you know what I mean? And then you wonder, like, what will the world grow into that will assist other aura colors to really find their niche, which I feel like it's not, the empath auras are there. We're getting there, because I feel like there's a lot of need for more talking back how this is affecting everybody. And with social media and stuff like that, there's a lot more agency. Anyways, and turquoise, I'll tell you, more turquoise than you'd think in past pictures, kind of the science-y professions, nature professions, women and men. I was seeing I don't know, this might age me. I remember when I was a kid, oh my gosh, I didn't plan to say this. Jacques Cousteau. I don't know, a couple people are like, yeah, thank you. Where there's like 4 of us. He was this guy and he used to be on TV and he would just scuba dive and he was a big savior of the oceans and I just loved his show. He was turquoise. I remember watching him as a kid, and I think even when I was watching him as a kid, the shows were old. So, but I remember watching him being like so mesmerized. I'm like, his aura looks like the water he is in. That is crazy. I didn't know the word aura back then. I just knew he looked like that. I just remember being fascinated with it. So turquoise, more than you'd think, existed back then. So yeah, I just want to plug again the quiz. Which leading lady do you vibe with? Please go take it because I worked so hard on it. And then at Wave Podcast, they did amazing. Adam and team did just amazing graphics because he's green. And I really appreciate him. And yeah, please take it and see which historical person you vibe with, and you can read about their auras and then read about how it connects to you. And I just want to see that. But let's continue talking over on the Mystic Michaela Spiritual Family Facebook page. I want to hear what you have to say about this. What do you think about auras in a time capsule? How do you feel about your own experiences with the older generations, what they've taught you, what you've learned, how you've seen them grow? What have you learned about your own as you've gotten older? What pieces have you cut out that you're putting back together? How do you feel about this time period? I think your insights are so essential that we just, keep this conversation going because it is doing something. When we come back, we're going to talk with Scotty. I would never have known that the price of my subscription for a music streaming service was going up unless Rocket Money hadn't told me. I mean, think about it. How closely do you track your bank statements and credit card history? I mean, do you comb through every single charge on a regular basis or just assume everything's fine until you notice something's weird? Honestly, I don't have time to watch my accounts that closely, but now that I'm using Rocket Money, it does all that for me so I don't have to worry about it. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. Rocket Money will even try to negotiate lower bills for you by up to 20%. All you have to do is submit a picture of your bill, and Rocket Money takes care of the rest. They'll deal with customer service for you. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's features. Stop wasting money on things you don't use. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions by going to rocketmoney.com/KYA. That's rocketmoney.com/KYA. rocketmoney.com/KYA. Hey, Scotty.
Hey, guys.
All right. So I was just talking about how ways of thinking differ from the past to the present. I mean, in name only, possibly. Maybe it just changes forms, but I'm not the historian here. You are. So what am I talking? Sometimes I'm like, what am I talking about? Ways of thinking or ideals? Like, what am I saying?
Yeah. No.
And then you knew. Yeah. You knew. And I was so grateful that you knew what I was rambling about.
No, it is fascinating. And it's interesting because, I taught history for 20 years.
Yes.
Long time. Love teaching history.
Yeah.
There's just the other stuff I didn't like.
Yeah.
Dealing with the rest of the building. But
right.
Anyway.
I think that's a common thing for most teachers. Right.
Right. And, I was never a social historian.
Okay. I don't know what that is.
A social historian would be like someone who studies like the people of the time period. Like,
yeah.
I always taught it from a top-down approach. So, I'm teaching about the presidents, the mayors, the governors, and things like that. But some historians like to teach it from a social point of view.
Yeah.
Which is where you would actually look at the life of a peasant living in Russia in 1850.
That's what I'd be interested in.
Right.
Like, I want the historical psychologist. I don't even know if that's real.
Yeah, they're called social historians.
Oh, it's a social historian.
Social historians, yeah.
And
I was actually, that's the part that actually interests me the least. Yeah. So,
you're like, I don't care how that peasant felt.
Yeah, but now now I'm actually more into that.
I'm more into how they felt. Like, whoa, what was that like? Like, I'm just a person. They're just a person. I don't know. Like, that part interests me.
Yeah, so, now that I'm thinking about it in that way, let's just take communism.
Okay.
The theory of communism. Okay, and I don't want to get too teacher here, but Karl Marx invented communism.
As he brings out the blackboard just rolled out behind you, right. And you have, like, your tie on.
Yes.
Like, I don't want to get you teacher here. Like, best teacher in the world mug just showed up in your hand. Yeah. Like, okay.
It's funny. I spent so many years trying to get away from teaching, and now here I am.
Here you are.
I like it better this way, though.
Yeah.
On my own time.
All right, so who?
But anyway, all right, Karl Marx and Frederick Engels write the Communist Manifesto.
Whoa.
1848.
They just two dudes, like, let's write this?
Two dudes, big flop at the time. No one's reading this.
I wonder if they were green.
Yeah, they probably were.
Okay.
And, but anyway, eventually it does take traction. Okay, it just was a little bit ahead of its time, let's say. It was a philosophy. But then, looking at the time period that it came out in, when it actually got traction, which would be the end of the 1800s into the 1900s, and it actually was the basis of a revolution in Russia, the communist revolution. What was going on? Now, it was basically for workers. Yeah. Industrial workers. That's what it was supposed to focus on. Mm-hmm. And at that time period, if you think about it, if you were living in the 1880s and you were in a factory in, let's say, in either the United States, England, Russia, your life was pure misery.
Upton Sinclair, The Jungle.
Yes. The meatpacking industry.
That came out of a little 7th grade filing cabinet in my brain.
And there was actually guys like Teddy Roosevelt that actually helped people in the meatpacking industry because he was for the little guy.
Where did that come from?
Yeah.
Whoa.
That's actually, wow, that's really cool. Thanks for bringing that up.
That surprised my brain.
Yeah. And, but what was going through what would have been going through their minds? Meaning, like, you're a factory, you're working 16 hours a day, your wages are minimal, you get hurt on the job, that's it for you, you're out, good luck to you.
You're a sad-looking blue.
Yeah. I mean, and then this theory of communism comes about, and we're not saying if it's good or bad here, we're not going to judge on that.
Right.
And then this theory of communism comes out, and there's guys like Vladimir Lenin in Russia telling you, we're going to give you this, and we're going to divide it equally.
Yeah.
Land for the people, and, food for everyone.
Yeah.
And so communism feels green to me. Like you said, I think, Karl Marx
feels like an out.
Green feels like an out.
It feels like an out. Like, if I'm that person, see, we know what that word is now.
Right.
So we have, like, different connotations to it. But at the time, like, you call it anything and I'd be like, oh, that sounds like an out.
Right.
I'll take an out.
So all these people that were, signed up with the Communist Party, is there, I guess it's being impacted, right? Or it doesn't mean that they're
I would think color. To me, they're an aura color.
Yeah.
They're very downtrodden blue aura. Whether they're blue or not, everyone's just kind of like muted blue. Well, no, because there's pictures. Like, when I see like the factory worker kids, because I was looking at a bunch of pictures before this episode of just, and I would say, like, there's just kind of this oppressed blue shade on everyone. Okay. It's just like a heavy blue blanket, just kind of like it is what it is. And a fear plus a sadness plus a kind of like sense of duty. Possibly you're just constantly roped in. You're doing it for family members. Like, you're all struggling to survive together or something. It could be that too. Some sort of cohesive collectiveness that they're doing it together.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that comes in, because the blue to me feels like a web of togetherness. So all those energies of the people. So when they're talking about the people, when I see it, the people are all wearing kind of like a very similar aura color. Yeah. So if you were like to touch that thread, that's going to spread real quick. It's like a very common thread woven in everyone at the same time. They did it to oppress them. But if you touch the singular thread, energy thread that's oppressing everyone at the same time, it gets to them a lot quicker. So that must have spread real quick, that kind of philosophy. And also, they already have it in their heads for the good of the order. It's just the good of the order in the other way. So instead of like, and I don't know if this is right because I'm not a historian, but I just get this vibe on it. Like I work 16 hours a day, 6 days a week for my family. But what if I do this instead? I stand in brotherhood with my I don't know if you call it fellow factory workers or whatever.
Right.
So the selflessness.
In Russia, they would call the Soviets. That's how they get the term Soviet.
So there's a selflessness that they're tapping into. Right. So there's the pre-existing selflessness or collective mindset. It's
totally fascinating. And it's interesting because I like that you said that were they green. And if you look at communism in itself, it's just a philosophy.
Okay.
It's green. It's total green, right? And it's a whole system. And Karl Marx and Frederick Engels laid out this whole thing that would happen, like first this step, and then this step, and then this would happen.
Okay.
And you talk about greens being very system oriented. But it's funny because I think when the revolution happened, let's say in Russia, 1917, and guys like Vladimir Lenin came about, who led the revolution, they seemed like they were red. Now I don't know, I don't know, just. Because then what they did was they took that system and they applied it to themselves to gain power. So like, in Karl Marx's system, everybody's equal. And if you ever seen the movie Animal Farm, right?
No.
You never saw Animal Farm, the cartoon? Where all the animals are equal, and then finally some animals are more equal than others.
Oh, okay.
That's the idea of Lenin, that you couldn't have everyone equal if you're going to run a revolution. There's got to be a few people that are in charge.
Right.
And I'm saying that might be like the red takeover. And the color was red too.
That's right.
But that's fascinating.
I have their pictures, so this is just like Karl Marx. Whoa.
Yeah.
So he's green blue.
Okay, that makes sense.
So just looking at him, and again of the time,
right?
I'm not saying he's some awesome dude.
No,
but I feel like he has, like, I don't know who he is, so I don't know if I'm saying somebody awful's okay. By the way, But I get with him, he thinks he's right.
Okay,
and so I feel like he also thinks like he does feel studious about it, and he feels like he has a solution to things. So whatever he wrote, I feel like he believed in it.
It's interesting, and again, Marx sometimes is like a slur now. You can use it as like a Marxist or something like that.
Okay.
But he's just the guy that wrote the Communist Manifesto. It's funny because he actually was in poverty. He was impoverished. He was from Germany, and then he needed Frederick Engels, who was the son of a factory owner, to kind of fund it and helped him.
Okay.
So and the whole book is about the haves and the have-nots. So Karl Marx is like on the have-not side.
Right.
And Frederick Engels would be a have.
Okay.
Factory owner versus factory worker. Mm-hmm. So that's how, it came to be. But so he was green blue. Okay, that makes makes total sense.
Yeah.
And then do you have Lenin by
Lenin is scary?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Oh yeah. He's scary.
I'm serious. Actually, it's good. I don't know a lot of history. Because like, look at him, he scares me. And he's red and green, and there's no empath color.
Oh, okay.
And so that's wild. That's freaky to me.
Yeah.
And like, I don't even like looking at his picture.
Yeah, that's wild. Okay, that's it. Yeah, that's
because so he probably understood it enough to do it, but then also had the power.
Yeah, because he understood the system. He knew how to get the people on his side, peace, land, and bread, and then he also knew how to put himself in leadership position.
Okay.
And frame it within the context
of
communism so that it fit. Because in communism, you wouldn't have anyone above anyone else.
Okay.
But in Lenin's communism, you did.
You did. Him
and his, cohorts.
Right.
Him. Yeah.
Wow.
Fascinating. That's cool. That's real cool.
I
just history nerded out here.
It's interesting. I guess I feel like people just are people. But like so I can see why. Back to the whole ways of thinking thing, the latching on to something like that, what it means for them versus what it is. I feel like we can judge, but at the same time, where were they back then?
Right.
And versus what you think about it now is different. All right. Well, we have a new quiz. I'm plugging it one more time. It's the Leading Lady Vibe Test. Which historical figure do you vibe with? Go to knowyouroura.com and take that. We want to see your results over the Mystic Michaela Spiritual Family page.
Should I tell them who I got?
Who'd you get?
I got Sally Ride.
Oh, that's a good one.
Astronaut.
She's green blue.
Oh, well, I just...
That's who you vibe with.
Yeah, that's who I vibe with.
But you would never go to space.
Never. Absolutely not.
And she was the first female astronaut.
Yeah, I would never... That's true. I would never... go to space.
So I don't know. Did you pay attention while you were taking the quiz? Did you answer those questions honestly? I don't think you did.
I didn't. I just kind of pushed through it to see what I got.
Oh, thanks.
No.
Oh, the graphics are really good, though.
They are.
So just do it. I don't care if you guys do that. Just do it to see the graphics. Because they get some really cool graphics in there. All right. We appreciate you guys. This podcast is for you and about you. And we're so glad you spent some time with us today.